Well, yes, it says itself there, it's Mining Waste Directive and Geotechnical Matters, and that's me, John Carlon. I won't say consultant mining engineer, I'm a mining engineer and a chartered mineral surveyor. I've over 30 years experience in quarrying, underground mining of coal. And over that period of time I've dealt mainly with mineral planning matters, restoration, geotechnical and mining engineering issues at quarries and mines. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background today. I won't go through every slide in detail, but what I first of all wanted to do was to go through some history of town and country planning and the quarrying industry since the imposition of the Town and Country Planning Act in 1947, and bring that up to date, because as we've seen from this morning's paper, and I'm aware of it and so is everybody else, that rockfall and how we may avoid that or mitigate it is one of the things that is at the forefront at the moment. And what I wanted to do was really look through the history of mining and restoration, the geotechnical issues that we face today and the regulatory problems or regulatory impact of depositing mineral waste and other waste as well. And then see if there was a way of actually improving that situation in the future. So I'll just give you a little bit of a history really. Back in the 40s and 50s, most large mines were basically what we'd call despoiled land, ironstone working in Northamptonshire and Lincolnshire, some of the large quarries, coal mines, open cast coal sites. And there was a report back in the 60s, well the early 50s actually, about bringing things into a restoration project. So there was quite a large amount of money spent on restoring the ironstone workings in around Corby in Northamptonshire and in Lincolnshire, and some of the other coal mines that existed at the time. And from about 1972, the Department of Environment undertook some research and looked at the void spaces that were available from mineral working. Between about 1950 and 1972, there'd obviously been deposit of materials within mineral workings, both mining waste and what we call mining waste today, and imported material, and quite a lot of quarries were actually filled to the surface. In fact, I know of a quarry where British Coal, or at that time the NCB, actually filled a large stone and brick shale quarry with waste from their underground mine, and literally restored the quarry to the original surface. It's now agricultural land and you wouldn't even know it ever existed. Now, so from about 1981, the Town and Country Planning Act was reviewed, and what was brought in was a restoration obligation really to operators, and a restoration scheme was usually asked for, and it should be both robust and give some scheme, which was usually back to agriculture, and it would be conditioned within the planning permission. Now, at the time, from about 1974, we had a situation in the UK where there was material readily available for the restoration of a quarry, whether it was either old colliery waste, it was waste from other industrial operations, obviously waste from within the quarry, the recovery and the processing of material at that time probably wasn't as good as it is today, so there was probably more mineral waste then than there is now, and obviously that meant that most sites could be restored to the surface or practically to within an acceptable restoration scheme, and there was some surety with it, because if there was a shortfall, then what we got is landfill. Obviously there was a lot of waste being produced from about 1970 because of the Clean Air Act and nobody no longer using coal fires. There was a lot of domestic waste, and from about 1965-66 landfill became quite common. And that's been quite common right through to probably the end of the 1990s. Practically up till about 2002, since when the landfill directive came in. So what I wanted to do was look at the geotechnical issues and the planning issues for the quarrying industry today, based on that history. And as I say, first of all, regulatory control. Every quarry is managed, controlled by the Town and Country Planning Act, or the Environment Act if you've got a really old planning permission, which is reviewed on a regular basis every 15 years. And most of those schemes, as I say, would like to have a robust restoration programme, and most of them, at the time they were passed, if they're going to be a review planning permission, are ones that would have a restoration scheme to the surface, and it would go back to agriculture or whatever. That's not the case today. We've had the landfill directive, which has obviously regulated the amount of material that is available, and also we've had the mine waste directive, where fortunately, through a lot of work done by many professional people within the minerals sector, CBI Minerals Group, British Ceramic Confederation, British Aggregates Association, MPA, RICS, Institution of Mining Engineers, there's been some discussion with government and what the competent authority within England, which is the Environment Agency, about what is mine waste. Now, from those discussions, we ended up with a mining waste permit, and it was decided that most material that is going to be used within a restoration scheme at a quarry, if it's not being treated, i.e. not being treated by a wet process, or it's not had some flocculant added to it, or it's not being settled out, and basically it's not a permitted material, and it can have, if you've submitted your extractive minerals management plan to the agency and obtained an exemption, then all well and good. The discussions that I was involved in some of the discussions actually back in 2005, 2006, and originally when the mine waste permit came into being, it was thought that you would literally put a red line around the quarry altogether, because everything was a waste. And the reason is that in the United Kingdom at the time, we reported that to the European Union, we reported that we did between 200 and 250 million tonnes a year of mine waste, whilst in France they did about 30 million, and in Germany they did about, I think it was 40 million. So there was a hands held up in horror in Europe, as you can imagine, because Britain had 200 million tonnes of mine waste. The difference was that we, in the UK, don't have a great deal of what was classed as mine waste, really, i.e. gold mine tailings or metalliferous mine tailings or materials that have been treated chemically to release iron or lead or whatever. What we have is mine waste, which as far as we were concerned was anything that you couldn't sell, whether it was inert or not. And bearing in mind also is that we had a coal mining industry that produced somewhere in the region of about 50 million tonnes a year of waste at the time, from the 90 million tonnes of coal that was produced. And everything that was open casted was waste, everything that was in a quarry was reported as waste. So the situation arose that where obviously in England we had to discuss with our friends in Europe as to what was an exempt material. Unfortunately, that came down to being able to discuss with the agency who became the competent authority that most materials weren't waste, actually. They were used in the restoration of the site. So we came back down to what we have is a mining waste permit. Unfortunately, we're able to put a red line around a site for planning permission, but the agency, they have a green line. So that green line there shows the mine waste permit for a quarry that actually washes limestone and settles out the silt. Now, once that material is settled out, because they have a number of lagoons, then they're able to recover that material, and the word is recover because it's classed as a mine waste, is recover that material and use that in the restoration of the quarry. So as soon as it's settled out and leaves the mine permit area, it's a recovered mine waste and it can be used in the restoration of the site. So that material is actually used in buttressing the face with other waste materials within the quarry. So that's, as we can see, it's got a red line around it there because in planning terms, town and country planning terms, we have red lines, and when we do a permit with the agency, it's a green line. So as you can see, they're the lagoons here, and what they do is the lagoon material comes out of here and then it's used in restoration to have a low-level restoration scheme, and the next phase is here. And there's a recovery, well, there's an exempt tip of material there that's not been treated, which will be used in the restoration. That's the regulatory control for it, how to comply with your environmental permit. And I must say that they are quite reasonable. They're not the same as you would expect to find on a controlled waste site that takes black bag waste or actually takes inert waste. They are fairly reasonable. I think I'll say that a lot of this talk today is my own opinion, but I think first of all I know I had quite a lot of concerns about the Environment Agency actually being involved within the quarrying industry. because they had got no experience prior to the Mine Waste Directive. We had two regulatory bodies, one which was the Health and Safety Executive and one which was the local planning authority or county planning authority. And then the Environment Agency were obviously elected to be the competent authority. In Scotland that's quite different. The planning authority, the planning officers in Scotland decided that they would like to deal with this. So I believe still in Scotland it's the local planning authority who deal with the permitting of mine waste, whereas in England and Wales it's the Environment Agency. But I must say the Environment Agency have been very, the mine waste permitting has been really, it's a fairly simple standard rules permit and really mirrors the management operations that we're all used to, the deposit of waste and the safety aspects of it. There's a reporting procedure, obviously, on how much a quarry would produce and where it is used if it's recovered. But again, it's fairly easy, I would imagine, to deal with. Now, the agency have obviously published a position statement on mining waste, and they have a standard rules permit. And as I say, most mineral workings in the United Kingdom are exempt from mine waste, the directive anyway. Most of the material is actually, as we say, restoration material. This is some of the guidance I tend to look at when I'm looking at restoration of a quarry today. The reason being is that there aren't the materials available, as I said earlier, that there were even 15 years ago. There is better processing of material from the quarry, which is obviously then marketable. So the losses are less. There is not the amount of material that would have been available 20 years ago or 10 years ago from the waste sector, because we've driven that down through our recycling initiatives. And the other thing is that even though that may well be the case, designing a restoration scheme for a quarry that may not get that sort of material and not be restored, then there's quite a lot of guidance that you can go to, obviously from Queen Jack and from the Environment Agency and other learned bodies. So what I wanted to do was have a look at geotechnical assessments, and obviously they've been with the mining industry in relation to tips since 1969. Now, when the Mines and Quarries regulations came into being, as I say, in my opinion, there was quite a lot of material that was available for depositing within quarries, whether it was to build buttresses against faces or to actually fill a quarry to the surface. There was construction and demolition rubble, there was excavation material, there was domestic refuse, and there was industrial waste as well. And the total amount was somewhere in the region of about 270 million tonnes, I think, every year. So back in the 1990s, I was involved in undertaking risk assessments and what you say precursor to quarry regulation reports on brick clay quarries and sandstone quarries and a mixture of the two, or limestone quarries, whatever. And you'd look at the geotechnically, you would look at a quarry, and you'd be looking at it in a fairly short-term period. You would say, well, the face is going to be open, but it's only going to be open for probably 10 years because some landfill company is going to come along and actually want to fill it in. So rockfall wise or failure mechanisms or whatever, you'd be looking at the period of time for the client as a quarry operator over a period of about 10 years. Because it's likely that it would either be backfilled with overburden or the losses from the processing, or it will be backfilled with refuse or waste. And then obviously it becomes the waste operators' issues. That situation is now changed quite dramatically, I've found, over the last 5 years or 10 years. Well, mainly 5 really. The reason being is because obviously most waste now is 10-15% of what's produced at a quarry, and that doesn't provide us with a lot of material to buttress a face or landscape an area or whatever. So the other source that we would go to look at that, I've worked for many a client who's literally looked at the void space within a quarry being a bigger asset than the actual mineral that is taken out. And that's how it used to be, really. That's not the case now, obviously, so there is not the material available now. So we're in a situation where we have to look at rockfall, we have to look at faces, probably been open for quite a considerable number of years, and there are planning permissions, obviously, as I said earlier, that were granted in the 1940s and still have got another 30 years to go. You know, it'll be 2042 before those planning permissions cease. So at the end of the day, we have to look at other ways of being able to restore quarries and also manage them from a geotechnical point of view. And as we say, rockfalls and the weathering mechanisms on faces has come to the forefront over the last probably 4 to 5 years, I would imagine. Now, what I used to do is I used to look at what material was available as an inert material around the quarry, so that we could import material and my client would get 20 quid a tonne and they wouldn't have to be bothered about the stability of the face, because within a few months it would be filled against and we'd have a nice slope. Now, there used to be a lot of material available to fill quarries in, and I've designed many a nice landscape scheme or even filled it to the top or whatever. And you could do that through the discussion with the Environment Agency by what was known as an exemption. So you could have an exemption under paragraph 19, which could be for a sports field, or it could be a cycle track, or it could be even an industrial estate or whatever. And you could bring in material that was fit for purpose. In other words, it could be engineered, it could be rolled, compacted, placed, and from that, once you'd built that, you could have a sports centre, or you could have some sports fields or whatever, and that was an exemption. There was no waste management licensing regulation on that. Same with the paragraph 9. There's been lots and lots and lots of railway cuttings and old roadway cuttings were filled in through the 90s under a paragraph 9 exemption from the agency. And some quarry work could be done under paragraph 9, particularly if you were wanting to lift a level within a quarry, you could actually use a paragraph 9 exemption. All those have gone now, and we have what we call a standard rule permit. Similar to the mine waste permit, it's similar to that, but a lot more control. There's a lot more control on what you bring in, waste acceptance procedures, and things like that. Now, those standard rules permits, or if you wish to have a lot of material, you can have a bespoke permit. What they tend to do is require things for engineering the quarry. Then you can obviously compact material in and then start to bring in material to place against the face. And if I just go back to that one, that's that is an assessment of a quarry backfill with waste from the quarry itself. And then we've looked at putting a buttress in with it of inert waste imported into site, and also with the majority of it being mining waste as well, to slacken the slope on the overburden that's being placed in backfilled into the quarry. And that's the operation that was taking place at the time, so we're rolling material in. Now, if you can procure inert material under a recovery operation, then that obviously can be added to your mine waste or your exempt mining material, and it can be used in the restoration of the quarry workings, and it can be used against quarry faces to restore that quarry face and hopefully mitigate or avoid altogether our problems with rockfall and instability. I'll just flick through one or two of the photographs, because I'm aware that as time rolls on, it's getting towards lunchtime. Now, obviously, as we're all well aware, the majority of quarrying companies either have their own specialists, or they've got their own consultant engineers who are consultants like myself, who can come along and provide a scheme to mitigate, avoid and manage geotechnical problems within a quarry. Most of them, as it says there, there is going to be a void left, because the amount of material that's taken out of a quarry or a brick clay pit is probably going to be in the region of 70, 75%, 80%. So that really needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed over a number of years, and try and move the mindset away from not using material that clearly is restoration material within a quarry. As I say there, 10 years ago, large voids in brick pits and quarries, any geotechnical would consider a medium risk to the faces and tips, as it was likely that the site would be used for landfilling biodegradable waste, with an inert material being used for engineering and cover. And that was the case back in the 1990s till about 2004. Our waste just used to do a hole in the ground and we filled it in. Now, we have a situation where this particular quarry, this is a brick pit that had has had a long life, and the field that the actual material was taken from was 64 acres. And so this quarry has actually gone through from the 1950s, where you could backfill it right to the surface, to a situation where material wasn't available. And fortunately, about 16 acres of the quarry has been, about 56 acres of the quarry has been restored. But when we got to the final void space, there is still some clay to remove, but when we got to the final void space, Obviously the situation's changed quite dramatically. And what we looked at was, because it was a relatively small void, probably about 6 acres left and there's quite a lot of mineral waste, we were looking at doing a recovery on that particular site, and actually we went to the Environment Agency and asked the Environment Agency if we could restore the site to the surface, which the planning permission allows. And bearing in mind that the other 56 acres was now back to agricultural land and producing wheat and barley and whatever, and large agricultural machinery was actually driving around on the other 56 acres. We went for a recovery now, and we had lots of protracted discussions with the Environment Agency about how much material could be brought in to actually recover the site to the surface. And in the end, the agency actually said that what they would like to see would be a recovery scheme, but we'd have to have a divot in the field, so we'd have to have a bowl shape in the field, and that could be achieved. That would achieve the same end result as what we required for the agricultural after use. The planning authority weren't happy with that, and neither was the owner, so at the end of the day we decided to have a permitted landfill, which means that there are groundwater monitoring, gas monitoring, engineering of the base, even though it's only inert material. So in the end, the client agreed with the agency to have what is an inert landfill. And that was mainly because the agency couldn't put a figure on how much material would be allowed in under the recovery against a landfill permit. Things have moved on a bit now. I think they're a little bit more pragmatic, really, because you do get to a situation like that one where you've got a low-level restoration of a limestone quarry with material placed against it, and whilst that might be, it's an acceptable restoration scheme. We've got the bottom of the quarry, and then we've got the limestone face went all the way around there, and now material's being placed against it on a 1 in 2 slope. It's stable, it's grassed up, but whether that's the beneficial after use or it can be used is debatable. So things have moved on a little bit with the Environment Agency, and as a consultant or a mining engineer to the quarrying industry, I've been looking at ways of how we can use recovery, and a minimum amount actually of imported materials with the materials that are produced at the quarry, because that's a prerequisite of a recovery. You only use the minimum amount of a material imported to site to provide you with a restoration scheme. So this sort of thing is a good way of actually restoring a quarry to a low-level restoration. But again, whether it's a beneficial after use is debatable. Now, because material hasn't been available to import into quarries, then we've, obviously now we have a situation where we buttress mine waste up against faces to actually reduce the risk and prevent people moving into a rockfall zone. So we've begun to use as much material as we possibly can. We sometimes have a situation like that. I work for quite a few dimension stone operators as well, who take out block stone, and some of the old Victorians and engineers have been there before, obviously, to build our beautiful towns and cities of stone within in the United Kingdom, and obviously sometimes, they are aware of where these workings are, but sometimes you get something like that, which is an old underground gallery for flagstone mining. And obviously, as you can see on there, that's the bottom is where it's all been backfilled with dressed stone chippings. So we have to look at that from a geotechnical point of view as well, as not just as exposed faces, rockfall faces, but also look at it from a point of view that the land is actually, the rock itself has actually been let down in the past. In this case, this is between about 1875 and 1920 when they were flag mining. So, to summarise, really, we have a situation where we've got over the period of time that I've looked, from the 1950s, we've had a situation where most quarries were actually filled in with material, and up to 1974 there was very little regulation, to be honest, of what was brought in. It was usually under the Public Health Act or something like that, if somebody was having a fire or burning waste or whatever. And believe you me, up to about 1960, 1970, that used to go on quite a lot. They used to set it on fire at the quarry, and that would be it. And then we've gone right up to about 2004, where there was material that was readily available. And then since the landfill directive and the pollution prevention control regs and our recycling initiatives, which, don't get me wrong, I think is excellent. I really think that these materials should be reused. But what I think I've identified is that at the end of the day, we have a situation where quarries possibly couldn't be restored, or they may have a low-level biodiverse restoration scheme with some long-term liabilities. And at the end of the day, the planning authority and the landowner, they want a restoration scheme. I mean, you look at most planning conditions on a planning permission for a quarry, it will probably have about two conditions on how you intend to work the quarry, i.e. your phasing plan and and the length of time you're going to be working. And then it'll probably have about 20 conditions on restoration. So you can see from that how the planning authority deem that restoration is the most important, together with the mitigating people's the impact near to where people live. So what I was looking at is how we can probably get some of this material back into quarries. And at this present time, unfortunately, the inert waste is deemed to be a suitable material for recovery, as long as you don't need too much of it. And there are some, I won't say, fairly loose rules on volumes and land profile, which restricts the use, really, because if the danger is if you have to have a landfill permit, the landfill permit for inert waste even is extremely onerous for the material that you're actually trying to bring in. You've got gas monitoring quarterly, water monitoring quarterly, you've got a permit which is a fee to the agency, and you could be racking up probably 10 grand a quarter on monitoring something like that. Whereas if you have a recovery, it's all down to yourself under your standard rules permit, which is on waste acceptance, on making sure it's inert material. And obviously you're mixing your own mineral waste with it. So I'll wrap up now, really, I'd just like to highlight the problem as I see it. The problem is the restoration of the site to a beneficial after use when there is pressure for agricultural land for food production, and renewable biomass, and obviously ecological improvement as well. And the government have currently consulted on a waste plan, which actually finished on Monday, looking for initiatives from both private, people like myself, or even industrial bodies. And I think there's a move towards, hopefully, in my opinion, is that inert material from construction and demolition, but mainly excavation contracts, won't be used to landscape a new supermarket or build a landscape bund around a logistics site. It'll actually be used to restore land, and that's what I would hope, is that ultimately inert material can come back to a quarry to restore that, and it shouldn't be classed as a permittable landfill operation. It should be a operation for recovery with the mineral waste, which would then obviously avoid the situation with rockfalls, historic faces in quarries that are 30 metres deep, really. So yeah, I've left a few issues for discussion, and which you can obviously read on the handout, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.